Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Ryan, and this is Pastor Daniel. This past Sunday, we had a conversation about racism at United, and we only had about 15 minutes to discuss. And so we wanted to take some time and just get a little bit deeper into it and talk about some other things that we didn't have time for on Sunday and continue to hear from Pastor Daniel. So part of your story, Pastor, is that you grew up, you're obviously black, you grew up in a black neighborhood, and you always had experiences and parts of your life that were in predominantly white communities or white churches, and so you've lived kind of in both worlds. And so just kind of talk a little bit about some of that and some of what you've experienced in growing up in those two worlds.
Man, I have experienced so much, and I didn't realize I was experiencing because I was young, you know. By going to a white church while growing up in a black area, going to a black school. I went to Ed White High School. All my friends were black there. I remember trying to invite them to church, because when you go to church, your youth pastor is like, hey, you need to invite someone, right. That's our great call. It's our commission to, continue to share the gospel with people. So I was like, okay, I want to take my part and I want to do that. And I wanted to invite someone to church. And one of my friends came with me. And it was awesome. We played basketball before and after service. But I remember afterwards, the day after, we're all standing kind of in the hallway, and they were like, hey, what'd you guys do yesterday? He said, oh, yeah, I went to Daniel's church. It's a real cool white church, man. It's awesome. And he just said it just kind of matter of fact, and I thought about it. I'd never thought about it being really a white church until that moment. It was like, I was like, oh, man. That's the way he sees it. And I eventually got all my friends to be able to come, and they, to this day, call it, the white church.
Right.
And so even in the Christian community, we split it. White church and black church and Hispanic church and this church and that church, when it all should be one. But me growing up, I kind of realized that as I got older, that, man, I grew up in a black community, going to a white church, being able to see both sides and the subtle racist remarks that were said on both sides.
Yeah.
We were talking just a little bit before about it going both ways. Racism flows both ways. It's just not white to black.
Right.
It's black to white. It's black to black. It's white to white. And so just seeing that kind of growing up was something remarkable that I really am glad I was able to experience now, because it helps me become a better pastor, a better husband, a better future father. All of these things, it helps. But man, I tell you what, that moment, I was like, I guess I go to a white church.
Yeah, and I think something really important, especially for white people to begin to understand, something I've begun to understand really just over the past year or so, is that although racism does flow both ways between, and prejudice between all kinds of different people and different people of the same race. I mean, you could have the same race and the city people make fun of the rednecks or the country folk and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like we get that no matter what, and it happens no matter what, and it's wrong no matter what. And I grew up, my best friend was black, and I would hang out in predominantly, if you want to call them, people of color neighborhoods, and so I would get made fun of because I was white, and so it does flow both ways. But something that I've really realized when people push back about that is that we do have to understand in the history of our nation how that power structure flowed, and so the racism going in certain directions is just maybe a little bit more impactful, or it's not better. It's still sin, and a black person or a Hispanic person being racist against a white person, it's wrong. But with the way historically civilizations and especially our nation have been, there has been a power structure where white people were on top, and so when that racism comes, it just kind of hits different.
Yeah,
I think
it does.
Can you respond to that at all? What do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. Even though sin is sin, 1,000%, because the way black people got here, and it had to fight for not just equality, they had to fight for a right to be called humans. first. This is common knowledge in my mind and in my community, but we weren't allowed to vote. We were property. We were the equivalent of a cow. We were the equivalent of a donkey. It was the same thing, and then we fought to be called humans. Okay, great. We made it there. Now we're fighting to the right to vote. Well, that's great. Now we're fighting to the right to have equal pay. Now we're fighting the right to even have the job. So we're continuously having that fight to be as good. I think about this in movies. I was talking to some of my friends kind of about this. I don't like movies like Pursuit of Happiness, a great movie. Love it. But I hate those type of movies. Because it's always and for me, this is just my thoughts. Yeah. It's always a black man starting from the bottom, making it to middle class.
Right.
And that creates this false ceiling on the black community that if I can just make it here, then I'm good. Yeah. And there's never an instance, until like a Black Panther, like, man, I want to see myself as more than, right. My goodness, maybe I can be a hero. Maybe I can be someone that can do something really, really great. Mm-hmm. Not just I'm known for making it starting at the bottom and making it to below middle class, and that's it.
And I think that whole idea of like shows and movies and stuff, like probably most people would say, is that really the issue that really matters? Well, probably not, but it's a symptom of a culture. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you grow up and there's very limited pictures of people that look like you being the hero, mm-hmm. being the superhero, being the put together family mm-hmm. on a TV mm-hmm. show or whatever, that's a symptom of something deeper, and that has to be hurtful. But if you're not a person of color, you probably don't see it as hurtful because mm-hmm. it's just normal. Mm-hmm. But when we start to think about it that way, so I want to ask you another question. So over the past year, there's been obviously tons and tons of talk about mm-hmm. racism and about, we're tearing down statues and changing the name of buildings mm-hmm. and getting rid of TV shows. And, recently the whole Dr. Seuss thing happened, and mm-hmm. I don't really know anything about it. I just heard about it on social media, but apparently they got rid of some books and all that kind of stuff. Some people are concerned, like, how far is too far? Mm-hmm. Like what is good, and then what is just divisive, mm-hmm. or what is helpful, or what is just trying to erase history? Like do you think people have overreacted, or do you think there's some negative that comes from all of this?
Gosh, it's so perspective driven, when it comes to different statues and things being torn down, and your personal views and your personal beliefs on those things. Like, I will tell you, as a black man, like I think about the school. It was called Forest High School, right? Because I went to Ed White, which is like right down the street from Forest. Like Ed White was on like Memorial, and Forest is on like Firestone, so it's like 2 or 3 miles, uh-huh. down the street from one another. And I remember, like, growing up, hearing about kids that go to Forest, and it was like a lot of black kids that went to Forest, but Forest, Nathan Bedford Forrest was a known like slave owner, and so it may not mean, I guess it was hundreds of years ago, it may not be that big of a deal, but it's the name of a high school, and so for me, it's like we glorify that by putting his name on a high school. Now, do we cancel out everything because of what they did in one thing? No, I don't think so, but I don't think that kids should be taught under that. That's just for me, because when you see it, you see one thing, but when I see it, I see a complete another thing. Just like the Confederate flag, you may see it as a Southern pride thing, but for me, I'm not saying you in general, but I'm saying people may see it as a Southern pride thing, but for me, I see they want to continue to desegregate blacks and whites and go back to where it was before. That's what I see. Right. I remember my parents telling me stories about cousins and about relatives, because we all grew up in the South. How when you would hear these racist remarks, or even centuries or years, not even centuries, but years before that, because my dad and my uncle, they were young, but they were part of like the Black Panther movement. They were really heavily involved in it. And so me growing up in that, when I saw, the Confederate flag, I remember stories hearing about people who waved that flag and what they did to my people. Right. And so I don't get joy looking at a Confederate flag. I feel pain and frustration and fear, really. Yeah.
Let's go to another hot topic. I know that we've talked before, and a big thing has been made of law enforcement and everything, and the way that people of color, but especially black community, especially even black men, are treated by law enforcement and everything. And you have family, friends that are police officers and all that kind of stuff. And we I mean, it would be chaos without law enforcement
For sure.
and anarchy, and we don't want that. But that doesn't mean it's perfect. And so, like, how do we support law enforcement and what they do, and respect them for what they do, and thank them for what they do, while at the same time supporting the black community who is speaking out about injustices and the things that we see, and George Floyd and all that kind of stuff. Like how can we support both? Because everybody wants to choose sides. Well, it's all about black lives or it's all about blue lives. When the reality is we can support both groups, but how do we do that?
I think it's the same answer for both sides, and you have to take away prejudice. Prejudice is just prejudging. So it's almost ignorant to have prejudice towards all black people because you ain't met all black people.
Right.
It's ignorant to have prejudice towards all cops because you haven't met all cops.
That's
some
right.
of my youth are some of the best JSO officers in Jacksonville. Awesome guys, great guys. I hang out with them all the time. They're amazing guys. Now, is every cop amazing? No. But is every black person a degenerate or bad or threatening? No.
Right.
You have to take it one by one.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people really make the mistake, is that they just want to generalize everything and say all of these people are this. And it's funny, Pastor Ryan, I think about it. That's racist in and of itself. That's a prejudice in and of itself. If you make me support black lives or make me support blue lives, that's prejudice. Because now I have to prejudge one or the other.
Yeah.
As I support black lives, that means I have to prejudge blue lives. And that's not right.
Yeah.
If I support blue lives, that means I have to now turn my back against black lives. That's not right.
Yeah.
So neither one of it's a self-defeating thing if you think about it. That's why I believe you have to take a biblical approach when it comes to any of it. And just like the verse in Colossians, that we need healing in our land. And it says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, I will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. But our first thing is that we have to humble ourselves. And prejudging isn't humbling yourself by any means.
Yeah. And I think something that's really important for Jesus followers is we have to understand that we get caught up, like the world loves the us and them. And we, as Jesus followers, like Jesus didn't really get involved with us and them. He was always on God's side, and he could see the good in people, and he could see the sin in people, and so we have to be able to not give into this temptation to be like, oh, I got to pick a side, because you don't. You can support people that are putting their lives on the line every day. And thank them for what they do and be supportive of them, while at the same time supporting a group of people who have been, in a lot of senses, unjustly hurt by that same system. And so, I think that's one of the biggest things that problems in our nation today is this. Well, we have to pick. You don't have to pick. Not one side is completely right and one side completely wrong.
You continuously pick God's side.
Yeah,
that's what you do. Like when you say you are a follower of Jesus, you have now stepped into a kingdom mindset.
Right.
It's not a democracy. It's a kingdom, and as a kingdom, there's one king. That's it. And so, no matter what issue rises up, you have to, because you're in a kingdom mindset, you're saying it's not what does the Bible say about this? That's what I need to look for. Not what people say, well, what do they stand for and what do they believe? No, I have to look at what does the Bible say about this? Because it really takes a lot of the pressure off. I believe that Christians should be able to have the most peace in this because it takes all the pressure. Well, I live in a kingdom, and the Bible says that this is wrong, so I need to follow that. And that should be the end of the story, you know? And so I think once believers really catch a hold of you live in a kingdom and not a democracy where you have a vote and you get to be the judge of your own heart, and you got to allow the Lord and his word to judge your heart on these things, then it really takes a lot of the pressure off, and you're able to actually do what he's called you to do.
Yeah. A term that has been talked about a lot in the past year is white privilege.
I could
White
tell by the way you
privilege.
smiled, you were going to say white privilege. I don't know why you said it.
It must be my white privilege. But it's been brought up a lot, and most white people resent it. And I won't say most. There's a lot of white people that resent that term. And there's a lot of people that say, well, it's definitely a thing. And then, you can find people of all races saying it's true or it's not true if you go look for it on the internet. But what do you, as a black guy, what do you see white privilege as? And what do you see it not as?
Okay. Can you do me a favor? I was thinking about this a little bit before. Could you drink some water? Just real quick. Nice, good swig. Good. Do it one more time. One more time. Good. Did you have to struggle to get that water?
No.
You just grabbed it. It was right in front of you, right?
Right.
There's parts of the world that don't have that luxury.
Right.
They don't have that privilege to have water right in front of them whenever they want. That water was packaged and it's probably in a fridge. It's nice, cold water. Great water. My goodness. It's real Christian water. But there's a lot of the world that doesn't have that.
Yeah.
And we, as Americans, are privileged to have water right in front of us. Something we take for granted. Sometimes we push water aside and say, I want soda. I would rather some Gatorade. I don't even want oh gosh, I hate water. But that's a privilege that you have to say no to it. But there's other parts of the world that don't have that privilege.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same thing when it comes to what white privilege is and what white privilege isn't. It is something that is just easily accessible to you that other people have to work for. That's the simplicity of it. And so if you look at your life and anything, there are privileges. So that there's American privilege, there's white privilege, there's all of it. It's all kind of packaged, in the same thing. I think this year it's just been shown that you may have more accessible to water than I do in certain areas, in certain things. And so I think that's just the simple truth of it.
Yeah.
Where people take that is where they want to take it.
Yeah.
But I think just privilege is you being able to take a sip of water really quick and other people having to walk a certain amount of miles or kilometers to go and get water.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things that I've heard against it that I don't think the term is referring to is, people that are white might say something like, well, but I grew up really poor. Well, I had to, my parents had nothing, and I had to work my way to get where I am and all this kind of stuff. But this whole idea of white privilege doesn't mean that you were privileged in every way.
No.
It doesn't mean that you may have been financially very not privileged, and you may have grown up and been looked down upon by other people and all that kind of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
But it didn't necessarily have something to do with your skin color. And I think you've told me some stories. I'd love to hear them again, or some examples of just some places where you've experienced some things that perhaps a white person wouldn't, due to the color of their skin.
Yeah.
So they might because of the way they're dressed, or because of a hairstyle, or because of an age, or even because of tattoos or something like that, but not necessarily because of their skin color. So what are some examples of that?
I remember I was in the town center once, and 9 times out of 10 I'm dressed like this, but this day I had to go to a meeting, and so I was in a nice collared shirt and some nice khakis and nice slacks, nice shoes, and I remember walking into this store, and the lady was kind enough, and she didn't mean any harm, but she was like, hey, do you need anything? Great customer service, that's awesome. But I felt like there was an eye on me the entire time, and that I remember like kind of shopping and feeling like this pressure I had to buy something to prove that I'm not going to steal anything, and I remember this pressure on me, like, why do I feel like this? Even I'm dressed the right way and I'm done the right things. I think you hit the nail right on the head, where when it comes to like white privilege, it doesn't mean you're privileged in everything that you do. And there's people that have down on you maybe because of how much you make or how much you don't make, different things like that. But when it comes to just you're privileged just because of the color of your skin, I think that's what we're talking about. When you get to, and not every store and not every employee by any means, but when you walk into a store and you're dressed the right way and you look the right way, you're just treated different. But for me, I was still dressed nice. My best clothes I have didn't matter. There was still this pressure on me. There was still this eye on me. She was always around the corner, kind of looking just to make sure, I wasn't taking anything.
Yeah, and you shared this Sunday, but I want you to share it again. Just some of the things that you felt kind of pressured or obligated to do over the years, due to the color of your skin, that kind of thing.
I remember we talked about this on Sunday. There's always has been a pressure, to act a certain way, to dress a certain way, to talk a certain way. And I remember, because I'm a pastor and I speak on stage and I do the video announcements for my church as well. And I have a great number of well-meaning to do Christians, believers. They love the Lord. I know they love the Lord. And so I'm never, doubting that. But they'll come up to me and say, Daniel, you're so well-spoken. They'll say, Daniel, my goodness, you read so well. And my question that always pops up in my mind, I never say anything, but is, I think, in comparison to what? What are you comparing me being well spoken to what? Or we're playing, everybody's playing basketball, and then somebody will come to me like, hey Daniel, you're pretty athletic, right? You play basketball, right? And I'm like, I mean, yeah, but you ain't know that, so why you gotta look at me? And I think about things like that, and it happens kind of all the time. These very, very subliminal, like we don't think about it. They're just sayings that we have, and I'm like, in comparison to what? And so if in your mind you're comparing it to not all black people are well spoken, that's prejudice. And you simply just saying that, asking that question, kind of shows the root. Like, my goodness, there is probably some prejudice that is there.
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think churches or Christians need to do, or are, I won't say obligated, but what do you think we are responsible to do when it comes to racism and fighting against it? What is a regardless of political affiliation, whatever, what is a Christian, and regardless of race, what is a Christian in America in 2021? What is a church? Like, what should we be doing to help fight against it? And like, even is it like a church talking about it or preaching about it? Like, what are the things that we should really be doing as Christians to fight racism?
I genuinely think, of course, besides being in prayer, because the Lord will guide you, and He'll show you the things to do. But besides that great point is this. Having conversations. It doesn't need to be a camera or lights or anything. Yeah. But take someone out to lunch. Have conversations. I believe that is something that is so needed, because you said this on Sunday. It's like, it's easy to judge a problem from afar. Yeah. But it's when you're close up to it is when you really get to feel the hurt from someone else. And if I know a brother or sister in Christ in my own church is hurting about an issue that I take lightly, it's probably not that issue isn't real. It's probably that I'm just far away from it. Right. And so we have to get closer. And that's what I think the churches need to do, get closer to it. Yeah. Get closer. It's a sin issue. Because as you get closer to it, just like light to darkness, the darkness has to flee. So as you get closer to the issue of racism, that sin that is racism, it's going to have to leave. That's just the power of God. So I believe if more Christians, more believers taking each other out to lunch, having conversations, sharing coffee, sharing a meal, then we'll be able to have these really in-depth conversations and just listen. It's not just about, hey, I want to hear you say something so I can respond, but just genuinely just listening. I think it'll go a long way.
Do you think churches have to be diverse?
I think churches should be diverse.
Okay.
I genuinely think that. Me personally, I don't like black church, white church, because that's not what heaven's going to look like.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a black part of heaven. There's not going to be a white part of heaven. There's not going to be the rich part of heaven, the poor part of heaven. He died for us all. I believe church should be the most diverse thing in America, in the world. This is my personal thing.
How much of racism do you think is, I don't know if this is a word, but just like culturalism? So, not that we're looking at someone's skin color and judging, but that we assume certain things about their culture based on their skin color. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think it is a lot has to do with culture, but the unfortunate thing is, like, for black culture, we're not coming from a place and bringing that culture here. This culture started here and grew up, because the first thing that was taken away from a slave was his name, his identity, his culture was the first thing that was stripped away, and they gave him a new name and do whatever. And so from that developed a culture in America of black people. So it's not like a Chinese culture that comes from, like, a Chinese migrated here and they keep that culture thriving. It's a difference between that and then a culture that this grew here. This is here. And so it's not just culture, it's history. So the reason that, like, I hear this all the time, like, black people love chitlins. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. Like, black people love chitlins. The reason that we did, because that's the nasty part of the animal that no one wanted, but that's all we were able to eat. So we figured out a way to make it taste good, and then we just passed that down from generation. That's our culture. But the reason that's our culture is because no one else wanted it. You know what I mean? And so I think that is something that is a part of the mindset of America, because it is our history. And when we talk about not wanting to hear about black culture, what you're hearing, what we hear is, you don't want to hear history.
Are there any other things that kind of come to mind when you just think about racism and the church and God and the gospel and all that kind of stuff that you just kind of have on your heart?
As long as you just look at it for what it is, call it for what it is, and it is sin. And until we get to a point where we can talk about it almost casually, like anxiety, we're ready to hear a message on anxiety. We're ready to hear a message on depression. We're ready to hear a message on wealth and all this stuff. When we talk about racism, we're like, oh gosh, I don't want to hear that. It's because there's something inside of you that is pushing back. And so I believe, as the church, we got to keep this in front of us, just like you're doing right now with your youth. You're keeping it in front of them. No one asked you. You're not having to have this conversation. You didn't have to call me up here, but you did. A year later, after the marches are over, the Black Lives Matter signs are kind of dwindling down. People are driving over the stuff that's beautifully painted downtown.
Right.
It's kind of okay, what's the next thing that we're looking forward to? You're still here and you're still doing it. And so I want to say, if people can mirror what you're doing here, I think we'll all be better off.
All right. Well, we'll end it with you saying something nice about me. Thanks, Pastor Daniel. We appreciate you. We love you. Thanks for sharing with us.
No problem, man. Love you too, brother.